Welcome to the Ricky Mathews Show. Hope you're having a great day. Still, as we launch this new show that we changed the name of last Thursday. Coach View served us well for a lot of years, but as new people came into the show, and I was thrilled to check some of the Facebook numbers. Like over 3,000 people engaged with the announcement around the change of the name of the show. That's really an incredible number of people when you consider that this is basically a local show here in coastal Mississippi. But a lot of people are paying attention, and they have their points of view about it. And the support for the name change has been terrific. The point is that Coach View, VUE, for people who'd been with the show for a long time, they came to understand what that stood for. View, incidentally, is French for the visual perception of a region. And, of course, coastal Mississippi being this great region, the economic engine that drives the state of Mississippi. But when people talked about this show, they would say Ricky's show. When I went out to give speeches, they would say, Ricky's show. And after a lot of internal conversations about it, we finally decided to simplify it and name it the way people refer to it. So we changed the name of the show. But again, Coach View served us well for a long time. We really haven't changed anything about the focus of the show. That is for sure. Hey, listen, one of the things that I'm most thrilled about, I've said this many times, so if you're a regular listener, you've gotten tired of me saying this, but I'm excited about being part of the SuperTalk Mississippi media family. This is a very unique company, whereas radio stations across the country are going to sort of a national approach. So they don't have local programming anymore. So they'll have a single sort of morning show that plays in all markets across the United States. Steve Davenport, who owns SuperTalk Mississippi Media, decided he's not taking that approach, that he wants to get local. The more local he is, the more successful he's going to be. And when we visited on my show a few weeks ago, he talked about the evolution of this company and the various networks that he's created, the sports network, the ag network, the news network. The news network goes not only to the 26 radio stations that Steve Davenport owns, but it also goes to a total of 51 stations. So he has radio stations that are not in his family of radio stations. So when the SuperTalk Mississippi News family develops news, it's literally just canvassing this entire state. It's a winning strategy, and I'm excited to be a part of it. The other thing about what they've done is they've created a multimedia approach. So you can watch our shows on YouTube or Facebook. You can watch our shows, obviously across from Twitter. You can go listen on your favorite podcast. You can certainly listen for this show, 103.1. And this show will soon start playing on other markets across the state of Mississippi. So we're excited about what's happening. I love this business. I love this company. And I'm really excited about what's happening specifically in the news effort. Now, look, SuperTalk Mississippi News has always been there. It's a great team of people that are capturing news that's from our shows, that are from, the hot spots of news across the state of Mississippi, and sharing it to, again, the 51 radio stations, and also on supertalk.fm. And there's also a SuperTalk app. So I would encourage you to download the app, or you can go to the supertalk.fm website. You can have access to all of our shows. You can have access to the latest news. But it's amazing what they've done. More recently, as I've discussed on this show, they've been collecting what we refer to as thought leaders from across the state that are now writing columns for SuperTalk Mississippi News. And it's some really, really bright people that have something to say. And I'm really excited about Hunter Dawkins is writing regular columns about a number of different things. He owns the Gazebo Gazette. Paige Roberts from the Jackson County Chamber is writing as well. Ashley Edwards. I'll have him on the show next week, but Oliver Diaz, the former Supreme Court Justice, is writing. He wrote a terrific column about his travels and how we in America take travel for granted. And just a really, really good piece of, by the way, he's an incredibly good writer. All these people are great writers. But Oliver has literally traveled all around the world. So we've had the opportunity to visit with him on a full show. But well, the next week or two, we'll have him back on the show to talk about his column, and excited about having him. But this has been evolving over the last couple of years, actually, and it's really exciting. And I am really pleased today to have someone who seemed like a natural to be part of sort of this thought leader family. And you'll understand if you've been on the show with me before with him, you know this already about my next guest. But if you don't know Brian Lamar, you will soon get to know why we're thrilled to have him in the Thought Leader family. And coming to us at midnight in Japan, which is where he's located right now, is Brian Lamar. How you doing, my friend?
I'm pretty good. A little tired, but I'm good.
Well, look, okay. So if you're not a regular listener, let me remind you how I know Brian. And then we'll take it from there. But I had not been with SuperTalk very long, and in the beginning of doing this show, I wanted to do it from the studio. Although the plans were, even independent of the pandemic, was to set me up a small studio here at my house so that I could do the show from my house, because I'm retired and I want to be able to do this show as conveniently as I possibly can. But what I wanted to do initially, though, is actually work out of the studio, working with Kyle Curley, the producer of the show, to learn as much as I can about how all this works. So I don't know anything about radio, or didn't know anything about radio at the time. And so we did the shows live. And not long after we started the show, I had someone show up with one of his compatriots at our lobby at SuperTalk Mississippi News, and went out and I met Brian Lamar, who at the time was head of public affairs for Naval Construction Battalion Center in Gulfport, the CB base. And then what started from that was just this long list of him joining on my show, and him arranging others from the CB base to join me on my show. His extensive, and we'll get to this in a second, but his extensive experience in the military community here in coastal Mississippi was unbelievable. But also the fact that he was so proactive in the way that he represented the CB base. He had an opportunity to go to Japan, to work out of Japan for a few years. He wanted to bring his kids there to give them some experience. And but just because he's in Japan didn't mean that he wasn't going to be a thought leader for SuperTalk Mississippi News, because he's going to be coming back in 2 or 3 years. But the perspective that he brings, looking back at the United States, looking back at coastal Mississippi from Japan, is something that's going to be a little bit of magic. And it certainly is proven true from the first column that he wrote. So, Brian, we're so excited to have you on our team.
Well, thanks, Ricky. And I really appreciate the SuperTalk family just embracing me and actually asking me to submit the column. It's funny. I've been called a lot of things in my life. Thought leader, I think that's the first. That's the first time I've been called that. But I appreciate that. I don't know. I don't know if I can live up to that hype. But one thing that I noticed going overseas, and I've been overseas before, but it's always been from the vein of being an active duty military member. Now I'm a civilian that works for the government, and I chose to leave to go overseas. It wasn't you got orders, whatever. I chose to come over here, and I knew that there would be a lot of differences between Mississippi and Japan. And yeah, let me tell you right now, there are more differences than I can count, and those are going to fill up the column for the next year. But there are also some pretty neat similarities between our cultures that I found. Little verbal things, but also food-wise and just the family values-wise type stuff. The Japanese, and I guess I knew this, but I didn't know this. And this is why you go overseas. The Japanese are lovers of democracy as well, and that's the long and short of why we're here, to make sure that they can continue to maintain that. And we are also, as a military, as a Department of Defense, not only are we protecting democracy and freedom back home, but we're protecting it from with our allies as well, so we can ensure that they still have that freedom way of life. And just seeing that similarity makes the job worth so much more while.
What I admired, Brian, as we discussed in the show where we talked about, your movement from coastal Mississippi to Japan, because we wanted to follow your journey. What I admired about your story was the principal reason for taking this opportunity was to expose your sons to sort of this international perspective, and you knew that it would broaden their minds. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, so going overseas, and you know, a lot of people can go if they're well off enough, or they've saved up enough, they can go on a quick vacation to Asia or Europe or somewhere, and you get to see it for a couple of days. You get to eat some neat dishes, or at least see it on the menu, and you get to hear some people talking kind of funny, you know, that kind of thing. But you don't really absorb that culture. You sample it, but you don't absorb it. And so I knew that my boys had very much absorbed Mississippi's culture. And I remember having a conversation with one of my cousins over in Van Cleve not too long ago. And about 6 months before we decided to start trying to come over here. And I was realizing that that's all they had ever known was Mississippi, and they were so fascinated by any facts that I knew about another country from my travels before. And it just really made me think, I've got to get my boys overseas before they get old enough that they don't want to go. You know, they get girlfriends, stuff like that. They grow roots too deep for me to uproot them. So I wanted to come over here so I could expose them so they could absorb that culture.
We're having a conversation with my friend Brian Lamar, who lives in Japan now. He'll be back to Mississippi in some time from now. But it's a fascinating story, and the perspective that he brings as a result of his experiences, not just the most recent experience moving to Japan, but his experiences around the military community prior to leaving. It really positions him well to be a thought leader, someone who's going to be commenting for SuperTalk Mississippi News on a regular basis going forward. We're excited about the partnership. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Brian Lamar. Welcome back. We're visiting with my friend Brian Lamar, who said during the first segment that he's been called a lot of things, but he's never been called a thought leader. But I have to be honest with you, because I've gotten to know Brian really well. That is typical, humble Brian. But what Brian brings to the table is perspective. That's what I love about anyone. I mentioned about Oliver Diaz, who was a former Supreme Court justice who spent a lot of time in Biloxi. He spends time in Jackson and Oxford. And he traveled literally all around the world. That gives you perspective. And when you have perspective, yes, and you're a good writer and a good thinker, you have the ability to sort of convey that. So a man, in Brian's case, who decides to pick his family up and his young sons and move them from Mississippi to Japan so that his sons can have the perspective of sort of a place like Japan, to broaden their perspective. You knew when you did this, Brian, that you would be changing them for the rest of their lives. They'll never be the same young men they were when they left Mississippi. And you wanted that, didn't you?
That's right. There's so many things, just like any other kid, like my older son, he's a bit of a picky eater. And that's just one aspect of this. He's a picky eater. And, we go to a restaurant now. There's a Taiwanese restaurant right down the street from our house, and there's some pretty unique dishes on that menu. And one of them, I think you might have seen the Facebook photo that I posted. I was eating a plate of silkworms, and from the name, people are like, "Ooh, no, I'm not doing that." But I told my boys, I said, "I'll try it if you try it." And my older son, he didn't try it. He sniffed it, put it back, and said, "No thanks." My younger son actually tried it, and he chewed it up, and he swallowed it, and he looks at me and goes, "Not my favorite." And I said, "Okay, well, you at least tried it." And I ate about half of them before I decided, no, I think I'm grossing my family out at the table. My wife had just kind of pushed her plate away, and I was like, all right, I'll cover these and get rid of them so they can finish their meal. But it was very unique, and it's just one of the things that my boys have been experienced too, is like certain dishes and just culinary delicacies that they have over here that we would never see over in Mississippi. Although Mississippi's got its own set of delicacies as well. That when we go out to eat with friends who aren't from that area, they go, "What is that? What is a mud bug?" And so, oh yeah, we're gonna eat some mud bugs. But yeah, it's one of those things. And we've gone to so many festivals. And I remember one thing that stood out to me is my wife looked at me and she goes, "I feel like." We were in a festival and there was a large replica pirate ship, not pirate ship, but like a galleon type ship that they had rolling in at this place called the Yomitan Festival, and it was a replica symbolizing in the 1300s like the trade industry that they had put together between Okinawa, Japan, and China and other places. And my wife looks at me and she goes, "I feel like I'm part of something ancient and special," and I understood exactly what she meant because I felt that same feeling. And we've been going to these UNESCO World Heritage Sites, these castles that were built in the 1300s, and seeing the way that they lived then and now, and how it's kind of blends together and how they've held so many traditions for so long. It's just really cool. It's so cool absorbing that culture.
It sounds like it is. We always encourage our kids to do as much study abroad as possible, and have a long story to tell about that. But here's the interesting part that you'll really relate to. My son Jordan, who's a lawyer now here in coastal Mississippi, man, he is a picky eater. He was always a picky eater. And he to hear him tell this story, he'll make you fall on the ground from laughing so hard. But he talks about when he was 2 or 3 years old, and he remembers this vividly, how he used to break me and his mother. He'd be in the high chair, and he wouldn't eat anything green. If it was green, like green beans or anything green, he was not going to touch it. And so, but Ann said, "Well, you're not going to be able to get up until you finish eating it." And he would just grit his teeth, and he'd sit there for an hour, 2 hours, however long it took. He was not eating the green beans or whatever was green that was in front of him. And when he tells the story, he talks about breaking us, which he eventually did because he was going to win. He went to Japan. Find this interesting. He went to Japan. And one of the things, he could do special order. You don't do special orders at McDonald's, but he had to do special orders at McDonald's here in order to find something that he liked to eat. And he goes to Japan for a study abroad program when he was at Southern Miss. And he sends us pictures of where he is, and it's at McDonald's doing a special order. He says it tastes a little different, but at least I found a place where I'm not going to starve to death while I'm here. And he's just missing out on the culture, isn't he?
I'll tell you what, though, McDonald's is even different here, and they've got some really cool menu items. When we went up to Sapporo for Snowfest, we got in really late, way up in the northern reaches of Japan for the Snow Festival, and it was cold and it was late, and so McDonald's was the only thing open. And I got a burger called a Samurai Mac, and it's like a Big Mac, but it's like a teriyaki sauce type based burger. It was so freaking delicious.
It was sounds
so good.
Great.
And then they have these like black garlic spicy chicken nuggets that you'll never find in McDonald's in the States, and they're so good. They sell out of them all the time because they're so good. But it's funny that you mentioned that. My dad and mom came over here for Christmas, and it's the first time they've left the United States. My dad's 60-something years old, and he landed in Narita, which is outside of Tokyo. And I met them up in mainland Japan, outside of Tokyo. And the first thing he said is, "Let's go get something to eat." And he asked, "Well, what do you want?" He goes, "I really want a hamburger." I said, "Dad, you know how my wife Courtney is always complaining that she can't find good tacos in Alabama. She's Mexican, and you're always getting frustrated with her. It's because you can't find good tacos in Alabama because." Well, it's not authentic enough. It's not what she's used to. And so I said, if you're trying to order a hamburger in Japan, it's going to be the same thing. You're not going to find a hamburger that you like in Japan. And he goes, "Well, let's go get one anyways." And he tried one. He told me, he goes, "Oh, that's the worst hamburger I ever had." It's like, Coach, why don't you order Japanese food? That's what they know. Yeah, that's going to be delicious. But they'll go to Japan and order a hamburger. So anyways, it's kind of one of those things. He got the culture shock with the food right away. But we eventually, we broke him in. people who know some Japanese food. I made him try ramen, like the real ramen, not just the little packets of ramen. A big bowl of steaming ramen was exactly what he needed to get right over here. And then some other things called yakiniku and okonomiyaki, some of those like traditional Japanese dishes that he was tasting, and he's like, oh, I actually like this stuff a lot. So I think since he's been back to Alabama, he's been looking for an authentic ramen restaurant, because I've never seen anybody demolish a bowl of ramen as fast as he did and drank all the broth and everything. And I kept telling him, don't do that. There's so much salt in the broth. It's terrible for you. But he did anyway. So, but
hey, Brian,
yeah,
let me tell you, when I worked for Knight Ridder, I was involved in some change efforts, and over a course of a couple of years, I flew 650,000 frequent flyer miles during a 2-year period. And one of the leaders of the effort, his name was Tally Liu. He was from Taiwan. And one of the things that made it tolerable to go with Tally to places like Philadelphia and Miami and San Jose and the hinterland was that when we went to, he would always pick a restaurant with some it could be Japanese, it could be Chinese, it could be Taiwanese, it could be anything in that era. And he would always order off the menu. And the food, Brian, was so good. Is that your experience in Japan, that the food is just amazing?
I thought I was going to come over here and lose weight, because you see all these Japanese people, and they're typically a lot skinnier than us Americans. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to lose weight. I have been eating and eating. Everything is more delicious than the last. And when I think I found a favorite restaurant, here comes another one. And so, there's no way I'm going to lose weight over here.
Well, it's exciting to hear your story, and to remind, we're going to talk about your column in the next segment. But what I want to do is kind of remind people a little bit about, not only were you right about your sort of travel perspective, looking back at Mississippi, and we'll talk specifically about your unique column that you wrote this most recently, but also I think the understanding sort of the role the military community plays in Mississippi, you're uniquely positioned to talk about that. But tell people a little bit about the various assignments that you've had as it relates to the military in Mississippi.
So, just in South Mississippi, I arrived in South Mississippi to work for the Hurricane Hunters as their media relations and public affairs person. So I would fly on the back of Hurricane Hunter flights and take media on. And then I'd write stories and stuff for our internal publications as well.
Let's do this. We'll pick it up right there. Hurricane Hunters is why it came, and then we'll shift the gears to these other perspectives that he got along the way. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with a SuperTalk Mississippi News thought leader, Brian Lamar, coming to us as past midnight from Japan. We'll see you after this. Welcome back with my friend Brian Lamar, who is a thought leader now. I formed this wonderful partnership between SuperTalk Mississippi News and Brian, who's a really terrific writer. This guy's a really good writer. And you can tell from the conversation that we're having that he's a worldly guy. He's humble about it, but the truth is he's a really, really good thinker. So when we went to break, he was saying that he came to the Hurricane Hunters and represented them as sort of their public affairs person. Can pick it up from there, Brian.
Yeah, so the Hurricane Hunters was what brought me to the coast, and then I worked with them for several years. And then I left them to try something a little bit different. I worked for the Keesler Air Force Base's the installation public affairs office, and I was only there for a short amount of time before the Navy called and said, "Hey, would you like to come over and work in our public affairs office? Not only do we have a different set of things for you to do that be fresh and new, but also we'll pay you more." And so I said, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that." And then I got over there, and then I was at the CV base before I left to come here for I think right at 6 years. So that's my experience working a little bit with the Stennis folks as well, and also the soup ship, the supervisor shipbuilding over at Pascagoula, just kind of collaborating on all sorts of things like that.
And of course, when you're with the Hurricane Hunters, that's at Keesler, one of the more important training facilities in the Air Force. You get to learn about every aspect of what is represented at Keesler and why Keesler is so darn important to coastal Mississippi, to Mississippi, and to this nation. But what a great learning opportunity that was for you.
Yeah, every element, military element on the Mississippi Gulf Coast has a unique contribution that they give back to Mississippi, but also like with a worldwide impact. And it's understated so many times. I tried my best to state it, but it stays understated how much of a global impact Keesler, CB Base, Stennis, the shipbuilding at Pascagoula Department, global impact every day, day in, day out. The military community, yeah, sure, there's economic impact and there's cultural things there that makes them important, but just the worldwide impact is important as well.
So Brian, let's get to your column. The headline I thought was just brilliant, and the headline says, "A Mississippian in Japan. Did I hear a gunshot?" And you know what's interesting? I've had a series of shows over the last couple of weeks that from it seems, whether it be spring break or teen suicide or other issues around sort of this violence culture that's becoming part of our society today, it's on everybody's mind, and people are writing about it. People are talking about it. Local authorities are having to think about how do they keep future events safe. And it's interesting, all this sort of swirling, and you're having your own observations as it relates to all of that, from Japan. Yeah. And it was brought about because you were at an event. Well, I'll let you tell the story. Why don't you pick it up from there?
Yeah, so I was at a festival with my kids, and at the end of the festival, a small part of the festival was a car show, and the cars here in Okinawa, they have their own version of muscle cars, and they're really neat and unique. And when we get a chance to see them, we go see them. Well, one of the cars was revving up his engine, and there was a backfire, and that loud pop just kind of put me back in that like almost PTSD fight or flight kind of thing. I grabbed my son's arm and I looked, and nobody else was moving. And I could have swore it was a gunshot, and nobody else was moving. A few of the Japanese people just kind of absentmindedly looked over, and then that was it. And I got to thinking, just like, and I say this in the column, just like any species that's introduced to a new area, they don't know what the predators are, so they're just walking around, without any kind of fear. And that's what was going on here. And then I realized, not too long ago, when I go to events now, I don't check all the exits and stuff. I don't know if this is good or bad. I mean, am I letting my guard down for when I have to go back to the States? I don't know, but it feels good to be here because I don't have to worry so much, and I don't have that fear I'm not afraid that I'm going to go to a concert in Las Vegas and some guy in a tower is going to start shooting into the crowd. I don't have that fear here because they just don't do weapons. It's a national thing. It's like rooted, entrenched in their culture. You don't see weapons. You don't hear about weapons. It's very controlled. The police, they have weapons, but they don't even carry them like our police do. I mean, they don't have to. And so I don't have to worry when my sons go off to school every day. Is today the day that I'm going to get a phone call, or if I'm going to see a Facebook post that there was an incident at their school, all that. And those are things that I started to worry about on a regular basis in Mississippi. I go on a road trip, and one of the packing list items is, I got to get my pistol. Like, why? Because I'm driving to Grandma and Grandpa's house? Yeah, that shouldn't be the case. And like I say in the column, and I'm absolutely not a anti-Second Amendment guy. I'm not a anti-gun guy at all. I do believe they have their place in society. I do believe that there's an importance for them. But I also believe that whatever it is that we're doing, law-wise and everything else, is failing because our society has become so violent that people are in a constant state of alert. It's like survival mode. We're not meant to be that way as humans. And here in Japan, it is so refreshing. It's so wonderful. Of course, I miss my home. I miss Mississippi so bad. I miss all my friends and family. But I do pause when I think about when we go back. I want to stay here long enough that my kids are at least almost out of school, so I don't have to worry so much. And yeah, that's what spawned the column. When I heard about the police officer that was shot, we know a lot of the police officers. My wife and I know a lot of the police officers, so we were immediately worried that one of our loved ones was shot. And then I found out 5 more people were shot during the spring break in the crowd, and I was like, oh my God, who the odds of it being somebody I know is pretty good, because Biloxi's not that big of a place, and I know a lot of people. So I was spending the whole afternoon here worried, and it just got me to thinking, and that's why I wrote the column.
Well, the story, and by the way, for people, I mean, I have an outdoor show. I own lots and lots of guns. I am very pro Second Amendment. And I don't think the way to solve the problem is to take legal guns away from people who own them legally. But as we've discussed in this show many times, this issue of gun violence, it's so complicated. It's about society, and it's about young people having the wrong role models. It's about it's complicated. It's really complicated. And what happens is people just end up throwing their arms in the air because it's just so complicated. We're not dealing, it's about mental illness. Mental illness is a big part of this. And as a nation, we have not addressed mental illness properly as a nation. But Brian, I want to come back to the basics of what you were saying, because it's an important observation that you feel safe in Japan, and often you didn't. It's not that you didn't feel safe, but you had to sort of be aware of your surroundings more, and that's the point that you're making. Let me just give you my own personal experience. When I go to a movie theater with my wife Ann or my kids, the very first thing I do when I sit down, it's just kind of, I don't even realize I'm doing it. It just becomes so part of what we do. I want to know where the entrance is.
Yep.
I want to sit on the end. I'm always going to be on the end of a row. If I can't sit on the end of a row, I'm not going to a movie theater. I want to be able to, because I want to be able, and it's not because I want to get out quick. It's because I want to be able to get, if someone were to come in and start shooting, I want to be where I can get to that person as quick as, because that's what I would do. I would go directly to the shooter. That's what what I would do. But I want to know where the exits are. When I'm at church, I think about it. Sometimes at church, I think about how easy it is just to open a door and come on in. I worry about that sometimes,
Yeah.
I bet everybody does.
And the thing is, you mentioned the movies. I was carefree and just ignorance is bliss type thing. I was in Aurora, Colorado, the week prior to the Batman movie shooting, when The Dark Knight came out, and on the opening night, the guy went in there and shot up the theater. And I was in Aurora, Colorado, at that movie theater seeing a different movie the week before. And it just so happened, I wasn't even from Aurora, Colorado. I was just so happened to be visiting, and my friend wanted to go. And I remember how close it was, oh man, if I'd just been a week later. And then the Gilroy Garlic Festival in the middle of Gilroy, California, I'd been going to that forever, and I happened to be visiting California, and I had forgotten my wallet, and so I didn't want to pay the money to go in. And I missed that shooting as well. 17 people got shot, and there's been so many near misses. It's scary.
Yeah, how can it not weigh on you when you're really worried about protecting your family, et cetera? Hey, when we come back, we'll continue this conversation with a new thought leader for SuperTalk Mississippi News, Brian Lamar. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. I have my friend Brian Lamar with us, and we're talking about this column he wrote for SuperTalk Mississippi News. The title, "A Mississippian in Japan Did I Hear a Gunshot?" It's really well worded. I mean, again, you're a wordsmith. People can go to supertalk.fm and go to news and then opinion, and you'll find his column. You can go to my Facebook page. You can find the column there. We'll also put a link with this show. But at the end of it, you said this. I get asked all the time the biggest difference what the biggest difference is between Mississippi and Japan. I would have to say there are many differences in many different categories, but one that stands out in my mind these days is the immense social safety that I experience here. In future editions of this column, I plan to point out humorous and weird differences like food, language, culture, religion, etc. So it'd be interesting to see what you write about. But, when you get away and have the opportunity to look back, I'm sure, as you and I have talked about before, there's something special about the Mississippi Gulf Coast, isn't it, buddy?
It is. It's a very embracing, warm and welcoming community. And I just, I'm thinking, when I first got to Mississippi all those years ago, and just all of the people that I met, and it was almost like I just met an old friend everywhere I turned, and that's one thing I love about Mississippi. Yeah, sure, just like any other place, it's got its knuckleheads, it's got its problems, it's got its social issues, but the people, the fabric of coastal Mississippi, and you've actually had some of them on the air that I'm thinking of right now. Jerry Dodge is one of them. Just a good, salt of the earth person, thinks of others, just in the community, doing great things, and that's what I like about Mississippi. That's what I miss is the people. But talking about that social safety in Japan, antisocial behavior is just so frowned upon that it permeates even to don't dishonor your family, don't dishonor your friends, don't be the embarrassment in your community. And so anytime somebody gets caught doing something wrong, and it happens, there's knuckleheads here too. It is such a shameful experience. The way that the community is kind of rough, but in a loving way, tough love. It's such a shameful experience for the person that gets caught doing something they're not supposed to do. It kind of tamps down on all of that. And as a community, so in Japan, you don't see people walking around with vulgar slangs and stuff, sayings and stuff on the t-shirts and everything, where like you might in a Walmart in the U.S. So I like that aspect of what I talk about, the social safety. I don't have to explain to my younger boy what that guy's t-shirt just meant, or try to not explain it, that kind of thing. But some of the humorous things about Japan, the funny differences and the funny similarities. One of my favorite moments that I've had since I've been here was Thanksgiving. I found out that they don't do sweet potato pie or sweet potato casserole the same way that we do. They don't use sweet potatoes in the same way we do. They grow them. It's a big staple crop here in Okinawa, but they don't do the pie. So I found a place that made American style sweet potato pies, and I brought I think 4 pumpkin pies and 4 sweet potato pies to a children's center here in Yamitan, which is the village where I work. And I brought it in, we cut them up, and we tried them, and they're all just dying over them. Oh, these are so good. They loved them. And they said, well, what's the main ingredient? And I said, sweet potatoes. And they have their own Japanese word for sweet potatoes, and I can't remember it off the top of my mind here, but they said, oh wow, we'll have to get us the recipe because we want to start making these here. But I told them, I said, yeah, where I come from, sweet potatoes is a big crop as well. We cook them differently, we use them differently. So but they do have ways that they use the sweet potato here as well, that I think when I go back to the Mississippi, I'm gonna teach some people how they do it here, because it's pretty good as well. Equally as bad for you, but pretty good.
Hey, you know what's interesting about what you said about, excuse me, the social pressure on a knucklehead?
Yeah.
I shared a quote last week from Coretta Scott King, and she said this: the greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members. And I share people's stories here in coastal Mississippi all the time, but that point about sort of the social pressure on the knuckleheads, that would be a compassionate action of its members to help steer that kid in the right direction. I wish we would do more of that in America, man. And we just, we're having some issues right now, Brian, and you see them more clearly when you're living in Japan. That's for sure. Hey, listen, thank you for becoming a member of our team. We look forward to future columns and, look forward to reading more about what you had to say and what you had to think as a thought leader in Mississippi. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you for having me on the air, Ricky. I loved it.
This has been Brian Lamar coming to us from Japan. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.